Hello, greetings, and thank you for joining us, Ipswich. My name is Tom Murphy. I'm the town moderator, and I'm here with the town manager and the chair of the finance committee to do what we call the moderator's warrant review. It's really my chance to sort of go through the articles on the town meeting warrant, which is coming up May 9th. Over the years, people have told me it's helpful, so what we try and do is go through this with general overview of the whole thing. So the next town meeting is May 9th. Per the bylaw, it's always the second Tuesday in May, 7 o'clock at Ipswich High School, Middle School, home of the Tigers. So, as in the past, as I said, I've had the town manager, who's the CEO, and the chair of the finance committee, which is the official advisor for town meeting. So this warrant has 25 articles. The first 11 I'd call sort of stock, moving the money around kind of things. We've got town, school budgets, capital planning, school and regional budgets. 12 and 13 are a couple of citizens petitions, one to lower the voting age and another to support a resolution to change the state flag. And those are both by Ipswich High School students. The presentation will be by. The next 10 or so are easements, land acquisitions, building repairs, water, wastewater, things like that. And the last 3 are citizen petitions, one from a town committee, one to propose a building moratorium, and one on noise bylaw. Just a reminder that these are the articles, that these are not motions. The articles themselves are not self-starting. It simply stakes out the limits of what the meeting can act upon. Usually, but not always, the motion is that the meeting do what the article says. One quick note on the citizens petitions. I noticed this time a couple of folks didn't quite consult with the manager, the moderator, or some lawyer, someone familiar with municipal government, and one of them is going to be non-binding, and we'll get to that. But it's helpful to consult with someone before you actually submit the articles. So with that, let's get to these 25 articles. Stephen Crane, the new town manager, and welcome.
Thank you.
Since November of last year. He's going to go through and explain what the proposal is, and Michael Dougherty, chair of the finance committee, will tell us what the official recommendation is.
Sure. Well, first of all, let me say thank you, Mr. Moderator, for hosting me here at the forum, and thank you to our partners at ICAM for having us here in their lovely studio and recording this. And on behalf of the select board, I'm pleased to sort of go through the warrant. And this is my first budget season here in Ipswich, but I've served in other communities, and so I commend both the select board and the finance committee on a very thorough, detailed process. And it is my belief that by the time it gets into the warrant gets into people's hands, it has been really well vetted and well thought out, and the recommendations that Michael's going to review were done very conscientiously and with a lot of thought. So it was a great process. My first one here was a great process.
The numbers add up?
The numbers add up, yes.
All right. Okay.
We think. So as Tom mentioned, the consent calendar is sort of routine annual business that is all sort of within the same small range of dollar amounts. Here we have the salaries for elected town officers, including the moderator and select board members and school committee members. And then there's a transfer from the light plant of what we call a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes, because the electric light department does enjoy services from the community, but does not pay taxes like another utility may. So they do what's called a pilot because they're tax exempt. Also, there's a few committees that have some, kind of ongoing issues that a lot of times when town meeting either has requested a report in a prior, at a prior town meeting, or if there's just stuff happening on a town meeting approved project, like in this case, the Public Safety Facility Committee, right. They're going to make a report because that project has been active in design and we're getting close to going out to bid. So we've got those, and then there's the Crane Beach pilot. And then we've got see these sort of revolving funds, they'll allow small revolving funds for things like the town wharf and shellfish enhancement and things like that. So those sort of set those funding limitations.
Those are pretty much stocked every year.
Every year. We've made a couple of tweaks to some of them. I think that like the town wharf went, I think either from 12 or 15 to 17, but those are the limits on expenditures.
Okay.
And then it also authorizes our ability to accept and expend it on a reimbursement basis, our Chapter 90 money, which funds road, bridge, guardrail, sidewalk reconstruction.
So that's just a mechanism to take state aid.
Yes, and it is routinely a consent item because I don't know if all 351 cities and towns get Chapter 90, but most, just about everybody does. And so you have to have an authorization to spend it.
Okay. And so the recommendation on that from the Finance Committee?
Well, first, let me just thank you, Tom, for putting this together. Thank our partners at ICAM, and welcome, Stephen, for your first Ipswich Moderator's review of the town warrant. Yep, like they mentioned, a routine business, and the Finance Committee was unanimously in support, 9-0.
Okay. So now we go into the budgets. Article 2 is the municipal operating budget.
So,
Tell us about that.
so as the moderator mentioned, there was an issue with some mathematical stuff last year where the numbers didn't quite add up, and this is really just a technical correction to that. But because it is last year's budget, it has, I believe it's a 2/3 vote, and so that is really to correct. It's a pretty small amount. I think it's. I think it's about 120,000. Yeah, so it's a very small amount. It was really just a Scrivener's error on last year's budget that was in the warrant.
But it has to get approved through the town meeting, so that's why it's
Yeah,
there.
it has to. Town meeting has to make the correction, so our what they call the tax recap can be corrected, and then our free cash can be certified.
Okay.
Right.
And the recommendation?
Recommendation was unanimous. We do need to take some funds from the stabilization account, which is why it requires a 2/3 majority vote in order to correct last year's budget error. And the Finance Committee was in support to make sure our numbers are whole.
Okay. So Article 3 is the Finance Committee election. The Ipswich bylaw for composition of the Finance Committee provides that the annual town meeting appoints one of the 9 members every 3 years, rotating 3 different seats. And so this will be to call from nominations from the floor. But I take it there's one who's on the Finance Committee already who someone will nominate?
Yeah, our member Bob Chambers, he is the one that we internally voted to fill the 1-year remaining seat for Janice Clement Skelton that left 1 year early. She was a town meeting appointee. He's been doing a great job. He's been very interactive with the committee and the folks that ask questions about the committee, and we are going to support him and make a nomination on the floor. So with this one, we voted unanimously to recommend it at town meeting.
Okay, and I do hear that there will be at least one other person who will be nominated for that, so there'll be some contest, which is attractive.
Absolutely.
Okay, Article 4 is the municipal budget, and this is $30 million in change in various departments. Why don't you just broad brush go through this for us?
Sure. So this was my first municipal budget here in Ipswich, and so I worked very closely with the department heads and our finance director, Sarah Johnson, on going through the budget request. Obviously, the departments have a lot of needs, but we also have to be fiscally prudent, not only to stay within the constraints of Proposition 2.5, but also to make sure that we stay within the limitations of Ipswich taxpayers. Mm-hmm. And so we were able to meet the needs of the community, but we obviously, the requests that came in greatly exceeded what we could levy for. So we are pleased to present a budget that is that only increases taxes within the 2.5%. I think it's about 2.25% levy increase.
So under the maximum?
Under the maximum. Mm-hmm. And so the overall budget is going up about 5%, but because there are different funds that come in, mm-hmm. People's tax bills under their property tax bills are only going up about 2.25%. So, I want to commend the department heads, and the select board and the finance committee as well, because inflation still continues to escalate well beyond 2.5%. Mm-hmm. And so, like I said, there were a lot of things we would have wanted to fund but can't. And so there's a lot of restraint represented in the budget. So that, in the categories that the budget is presented in are kind of set by general government practice of public safety, education, public works, debt service, things like that. So standard groupings. And so you have in the warrant, you'll have much more detail. So the general fund budget is is 22 million. The tax is about 22 million, and then you've got the utility charges and some of the other revenue sources that come in, and that all adds up to the amount that's being appropriated, which is the 32,157,228.
Okay, and what did the FinCom have to say about this one, Mike?
Well, the FinCom did its annual due diligence. We had about 7 budget hearings relative to this budget on the municipal side, and we had our bean counting and tri-board meetings, and we think that this budget here keeps up to the services expectation that the citizens have, and Stephen did a good job with his first year in on getting this put together, especially considering inflation having a major impact. But we do support this budget unanimously, 9-0.
Okay. And the next one is the school budget, which is a little bit more, 37 million and change. And that is not broken out because, well, tell us about that one.
So one of the things to fully fund the schools, and there was an override, a Proposition 2.5 override, I think, a few years ago.
Last year,
before my time. And
Yep.
so they go beyond the levy limit to fund the school operation, and when they have unspent appropriation, they put it into a stabilization account that helps offset increased cost needs in the following year, so they're not always going back to the voters for an override. And so the article is a few components. It's transfer from stabilization and to raise and appropriate. And that total amount is $37,580,266. The amount of the transfer from stabilization will be presented as a part of the motion, because I think the school finance team, is working on it as year-end, as year-end expenses become known. It's a different. I don't want to say it's a different type of accounting. It's the same accounting, but it's a different financial management technique that they use, which they can under Mass General Law, because the schools have really one category versus the town that has 5 categories.
Okay. And what was the FinCom's recommendation on this?
Again, FinCom was unanimous in support. We had a couple of budget hearings with the school committee and their finance team and the superintendent. They did a great job presenting this year. And they're doing a good job keeping the override healthy, and they're hoping to meet, if not exceed, the expectations of what they presented for the override last year. So we were in unanimous support.
Okay. The next 2 are for regional school budgets. 6 is the Whittier Regional, and 7 is Essex County Tech. So let's go take them one at a time. Those are, as I understand it, there's no real debate on. These are bills that we have to pay.
Yeah, so it's all based on enrollment, and because we are a member of Whittier, of the district, we do have, that's the actual assessment that we received from them for next year. Essex, this is an estimate based on our current enrollment, but as longtime town meeting attendees know, in the fall there's usually an article associated with Essex.
Right.
With Essex Tech, and that really is based on who enrolled in October. So the actual number will be clarified in the special in the fall. This is what our estimate is.
Okay. And the FinCom recommendation on these?
Both unanimous, 9-0.
Okay. Number 8 is a transfer of appropriated funds to a education specialization fund.
So this is, as I mentioned earlier, I sort of jumped ahead to this article when the amount transfer will be known sort of as they do their year end, so that'll be in the motion. They're still calculating it.
So
The annual budget one, they know that amount, but how much will be left in the stabilization is determined after this gets.
And in the warrant that's posted, people will read, there's no number because it's still getting calculated.
Correct.
Okay. And
I think they may know it now, but I think the school committee has discussed it. It may be even available on their website, but it'll be certainly clear in the motion.
Okay.
And I believe that happens every year, where
Yes, yeah.
the numbers, as you said, a lot of numbers that are in the warrant get finalized and clarified through the motion.
And the recommendation on this, Michael?
Again, unanimously support.
Okay. 9 is stabilization funding, and this is to transfer $70,000 to a safety fund, stabilization fund.
So the town has its own stabilization fund. As Michael mentioned, actually, we're using some of it I think we're fully funding the correction on the FY23 budget with stabilization funds. And you want to keep your reserves, like the stabilization fund, healthy because it helps impact our bond rating, which impacts our debt service costs and interest costs. So because we had some free cash left over after we had completed our capital planning process and a few other things that are in the warrant, our finance director wanted to add something back into the stabilization, even though it doesn't directly offset the $120,000 that's being taken out for the earlier article. It's good to make a contribution back in, so that's what this is.
Okay. And the support on that?
Support is unanimous. Like Stephen said, they always like to see a good track record of constant contributions, even if there are occasional little takeouts every once in a while.
Okay. And 10 is other post-employment benefits funding.
So what that really means is retiree health care, by and large. It's not retirement system. It's other when they say other benefits, what they mean is the cost for retiree health. When you're vested in the retirement system, you're able to have health care in retirement, even though you pay 50% of your premiums as a retiree. So some years ago, GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Board, decided that OPEB was a liability that needed to be counted on the books, even though the programs have been pay-as-you-go for many, many years. So it was sort of a regulatory change that created this liability for every town. So many communities in Massachusetts are now contributing something annually to make a dent in that. They call it an unfunded liability, but it's not an annual unfunded. We pay our bills for retirement every year. It's just sort of the full cost of it in the future.
Okay, so, and the recommendation on this one?
Unanimous. I believe, actually, we hope to be somewhat close to fully funded, even though it's always a moving target depending on your employee count, et cetera, within the 2035 to 2040 range. So, we are supporting the continuing add to this, and it was unanimous.
Okay.
Well, in market performance.
Right.
Many communities, OPEB, like you have a fully funded date, and I think we're in 2030 something, like 2032 or something like that. But
meaning by that date,
by that date,
to be fully funded.
Right.
We expect to have reserves sufficient to match the unfunded liability of the future obligation. Right. But in many communities, because the last year of the stock market wasn't good, like many people's retirement plans, that date went out, even though we didn't add employees or do anything else.
Okay, the next one is the annual capital plan. And this is a number of different, this is school and town things. Tell us about this one, Mr. Manager.
So, the Ipswich funds its capital plan by and large through free cash. So basically, funds that were appropriated but did not get spent because Ipswich has a long history of conservative assumptions about both revenues and expenditures. The town does enjoy the creation of free cash each year, and then that funds the following year's capital plan. And the capital plan basically is usually around between $1.5 million and $2 million each year, and we wanted to stay within that parameter as well. So it's $1.65 million in free cash, and then another raise and appropriate of $71,000. The projects are all enumerated here in the warrant. Some of the bigger ticket items, there's some technology that we're doing for the schools. There are some sort of routine maintenance items, like painting the exterior of the Payne School. There's flooring, HVAC duct cleaning. There's some site pavement and curbing at the high school. If people have been to the parking lot, it's probably the original pavement, so it's probably coming due for a replacement.
Fire ladder truck set aside $100,000. What's that? So
each year the town sets aside a chunk of money, usually $100,000. We are on schedule to replace the ladder truck, and those are about $1 million. And so rather than have to pay for $1 million at one time, you set aside $100,000. Again, a common municipal practice. Another big ticket item is the design of the County Street Bridge. As if you've driven down that way, you know that one lane is closed because of structural concerns, And we were working closely with Mass DOT to try and find a way to fund the improvements, the repairs to that bridge. But the town is under the obligation to design, so we have that design working
Is there
here.
a way to get state fund? That's not a state road, so.
But there are bridge programs that are available to municipalities.
Okay.
And then there's an equipment list you can see here. And in the summary that you'll see in the warrant, we do note that we will be purchasing an electric vehicle for the Detective Bureau, the Police Department. The town gets drug forfeiture funds from drug busts that are done in Ipswich. And so they don't require town meeting appropriation. They can be spent at the discretion of the chief. But my view is that when the town is purchasing a vehicle, town meeting should at least know about it, because we don't normally purchase vehicles unless town meeting has appropriated the money. So if you read in the summary that the town is purchasing an electric vehicle for the Detective Bureau, we note that it's not subject to the appropriation of the capital plan. It doesn't change any of these numbers. It's just, hey, we're buying a vehicle, just so you know.
Okay. And Michael, what did the FinCom have to say about this one?
FinCom was supportive, 9-0 unanimously.
Okay. The next two are the citizen petitions proposed by a couple students I mentioned. The first one is the Empower Act, which is it's a home rule petition.
Sure. And so what happens with home rule petitions is, and this would be in both cases, the legislative body here locally, town meeting, would act, and if they are approved, they would be transmitted to our legislative delegation for introduction and further action at the state legislature. Okay. And ultimately, and I'll use the example of the Empower Act, which would give 16-year-olds the right to vote in local elections.
Only local.
Yes. Local and state, maybe.
No, only local.
Only local, okay. That's not, even if this passed unanimously at town meeting, it does not give 16-year-olds the right to vote locally. I think just people need to be clear. The state legislature would have to take an action to do this. Now, Ipswich is not alone in pursuing the right for 16-year-olds to vote, but it's up to the legislature to make that change.
So if it passes at town meeting, it goes to the legislature and will at some point get acted on or not.
Or not.
And along with any number of others that come from other municipalities.
Sure.
All right. So what was the FinCom's position on this one?
The FinCom opposed this article 7-2. There were a few arguments made of the fact that Stephen had just mentioned, that there are other communities, I think Cambridge is one of them, who have locally approved it, but the state has yet to take up the issue, and that was many years ago that happened. And then the other argument was made that, kids should be kids for 2 more years, and since, kids aren't able to legally sign contracts or do any of those types of things, which is, when you think about it, one of the most important things a town meeting does. We're all agreeing to approve budgets and appropriate funds, along with the fact that 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds won't see the direct impact of the taxes that are increased or decreased depending on the decisions that are made. We believe that for the majority of us, 7-2, that this article should be opposed.
All right. Is the minority position an official minority position?
No, what we're going to do is we are going to actually have one of the 2 minority members speak on this article, both sides.
Give both views.
Both views, yep.
So one report from the FinCom.
One report for this one, yep.
Okay, so that was 1213 is the resolution to support changing the state flag and seal. And this is not a home rule petition, but to support a resolution to support a special commission of the Commonwealth.
I think the Commonwealth did appoint a special commission for this purpose.
They did.
And so this resolution basically would express the sense of the town meeting that there was support by the community for the changing of the seal and the flag. Again, this is another one that it's not going to change. The flag and the seal aren't going to change even if it gets approved unanimously. Right. It's just sort of a statement of support for the work of the commission by town meeting.
And at some point, whether Ipswich approves it or not, at some point this special commission, one would think, will do something, and there may be action on that would be official. But that's down the road.
Right. I don't think it's a local choice what the state legislature has to decide what they want for the seal and the flag, and the governor, obviously.
Right. And what was the FinCom's position on that?
So this was actually our most evenly divided article, but we did ultimately vote it down, 5 opposed, 4 in favor. And one thing that was a little disappointing was that we didn't get a presentation on this at our warrant hearing, either of our 2 warrant hearings. And so what we did was we took the article at face value, which is, a resolution. And, there were a few arguments made that this is more of a state issue and that the town of Ipswich should stay in its lane, something we've heard before, and let the state handle it with their own appointed commission. And then others have supported it because they just approve the idea generally. But ultimately, it was defeated 5-4.
And that will again be one report from the FinCom of both sides.
This one we will have a minority report.
There will be.
Yes, we'll have someone speaking in favor and then opposition.
Okay. Article 14 is the Ipswich River Ecological Restoration Permitting. Tell us about this one, Stephen.
So, and I know that this has been an article of note locally since before I got here. But basically, there's the Ipswich River watershed has a number of dams. I think 5 dams that on the Ipswich and Parker rivers that are sort of related to antiquated mill operations and things like that. Mm-hmm. And the Ipswich River Watershed Association, IRWA, has been working on a process to remove the dams because I don't want to speak for IRWA, but in terms of how the tides are able to move in and sort of restore what were tidal marshes and things like that. Before I was a science major, but it was political science, so I'm a little bit out of my depth here. But basically, the town has received a $2.3 million grant from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, to help fund the removal of the dams, including this one, which is called the Ipswich River Dam. It's also, it was the Sylvania Dam, I've heard it called. Mm-hmm. It's not the EBSCO Dam because when EBSCO purchased the property, the town purchased this dam structure from Sylvania GTE. So, so the town owns it. There's been a lot of study about it. IRWA actually has a storefront set up on Central Street where people can stop in and get information about this article. But when you talked earlier about non-binding, the approval of the permitting process is under the jurisdiction of the select board. The select board technically has care, custody, and control of the dam. So it's the select board's decision whether or not to proceed with a dam removal. So if this passes or fails, it's just a sense of the town meeting advising the select board on the town meeting's opinion about should the permitting process be pursued with an intent of removing the dam.
The select board can do it or not do it as they see
Yes,
fit.
and we do, yeah.
Because they're in care, custody, control of any property, they can do that, sell it.
Specifically this one, because that's how it was written. There are certain properties that may be under care, custody, control of the school committee or.
Yes,
but this specific one is care, custody, control of the select board. So, the select board is monitoring, wants to hear from town meeting, but is monitoring and managing the permitting process in partnership with IRWA. And so, as we get through the permitting process, the decision will likely be made based on the input and feedback from the MEPA, Massachusetts Environmental Protection Act process, MEPA.
And that's why the article is written the way it is, to express support. It doesn't say to authorize.
No, there is. In fact, the next one will be a specific authorization to the select board. That's the key difference. That's why this is town meeting saying, yes, we support moving forward this project, or no, we don't. But the select board has the discretion to move forward on its own,
irrespective of town meeting.
Correct.
And Michael, what was the FinCom's position on 14?
So the FinCom's position wasn't necessarily a recommendation on whether or not they endorsed the project or not from the select board removing or keeping the dam, but the Finance Committee does believe that the select board should do its due diligence and figure out all the different angles, and if we are able to capture some free permitting costs and it has no impact to the taxpayer, then they should move forward with that to see what the options would be. And with that, we support this article unanimously 9-0.
Okay.
For what it's worth, I think it was about I forget the amount that I sent. That I don't have it with me, but it's in the hundreds of thousands, I think 500,000 or 600,000 for dam removal. But It is funded by the grant.
Right.
So we're not even looking for money to do it here.
Right.
Okay. So 15 is to grant an easement for 69 South Main Street.
So this is my one of these wonkish public administration things that I enjoy so much. That people just can't believe that you have to do this as a town manager. But this is really to a private home that's a historic home in their due diligence that it hasn't come up because it's been in the same family for many, many years. But it turns out that it's actually right next to the dam, and so there are parcels affiliated with the dam that the town owns that really amount to this home's driveway and front yard. And so they approached the town looking for easements so they can sell the home, and the homeowner would have access to their driveway and their front door. And so the reason why this is an authorization to allow the select board to enter into those easements or to grant those easements is because we have received the plans from the attorney representing the family. We've reviewed it, but haven't spent a lot of time sort of negotiating the easements. And it's a pretty small thing because it's only the one home, and we just want to make sure we work with council to protect the town's property interest rights while also seeing if we can help out a resident who has a really unique title issue with their home.
Okay. And what was the FinCom's position on this one?
FinCom supported this 8-1. There was some concern that if by doing this the value of the home was going to be increased, then the town of Ipswich should see some sort of a benefit from this financially. So that was what the opposition was for. But obviously, in good spirits, we want to make sure that we work with our taxpayers and our residents. We want to make sure that we're able to give people that live in Ipswich abilities to utilize their property to full extent. But we also, like the town manager said, want to make sure that we protect our interests, especially if the select board do decide to move forward with the dam removal project, and we may need access, et cetera. So, but generally speaking, it was in support 8-1, and there will not be a minority report on this one.
Okay. So 16 is to acquire acquisition of Hammett Street parcel to acquire in interest and fee. That sounds like buy a piece of property?
It's buying a piece of property, that's correct. So this is another one that has been, I think, on the books or in discussion for many years before my time. When it was brought to my attention that this is something that the town was interested in, I have done dozens of municipal acquisitions during my time in local government, and so I know exactly how you do that. And so I was like, this is kind of an easy one. And so the owner is National Grid, and so I contacted them, and I retained a property appraisal to get an appraised value, because best practice is acquiring property through appraisal, not assessment. Right. Assessors look at sort of square footage and formulas and certain variables. Mm-hmm. The appraiser looks at the environmental conditions and any reports that go along with that. And there is what's called an activities and use limitation, because this was part of a coal gasification plant. So there is contamination on the site, but the site exists in a status of no significant risk, and that status is granted by the Department of Environmental Protection. And so these are highly regulated but very common designations for contaminated sites. So it's in shorthand, we call it a brownfield site. Mm-hmm. And Massachusetts does tons of brownfield sites every year, and as risk goes to the town, this is very, very low, because we intend to use it as sort of an extension of our Hammett Street parking lot.
And is there a fee involved in this?
Right now, the fee is $100,000. We are still talking to National Grid about terms, and so our hope is when we go to make the motion, we will have sort of a letter of intent, not quite a purchase and sale because we don't have an appropriation, but have a letter of intent signed with National Grid. If we don't have it, then we may move to take no action.
It may be something we don't go forward on.
Correct.
Okay.
We're still having those discussions.
Those things happen.
Yep.
Those things happen. And what was the recommendation on this one?
FinCom was unanimously in support. As Stephen had mentioned, this has been kind of on the radar for many, many years now, and if we can pick up that piece of that parking lot for very little money and at no risk to the town, then why not move forward with it?
Okay. 17 is to authorize the water commissioners, and the select board are the water commissioners, mm-hmm. to lease some property on Mile Lane.
So this is obviously specifically leased with Marini Farm, and under Mass General Law, when municipalities want to enter into real estate transactions, they generally require town meeting action, even if it's a lease. I think town meeting voted on cell tower lease last year, mm-hmm. so it's just a lease agreement, and I think it's really the continuation of a very long-standing relationship between Marini Farm and the town.
Okay. And what was the recommendation for this one?
Unanimously in support. We want to support our local farmers, and this is the piece of property that was part of the Linebrook Road deal of the construction that was done, how we were able to keep those acres and Marini's being able to continue to farm that land. So very much in support of this.
Okay. So the next two are for school roofs. 18 is the middle high school and 19 is Doyon and Winthrop. So 18 is $420,000?
$420,000 for the flat membrane roof that is leaking and is degraded to the point where we're having issues with insuring the roof. And so if there was some kind of roof failure, we maybe wouldn't receive enough insurance to make the repairs. And so this is a replacement of all the membrane flat roof parts of it. And this is a debt exclusion vote.
And so debt exclusion means that under Proposition 2.5, it has to also go to a ballot vote.
It does.
To be clear.
The reason for that is really because we had already written our capital plan, and this and the next one came in sort of after that, and there was really no way to amend the capital plan or find additional funds to do it. So a debt exclusion is really, and it is a significant capital investment, but the debt exclusion is really tied more to the fact that our capital plan was already fully programmed.
Okay. And because it's borrowing, it's a 2/3 vote, and it's also a majority vote at the polls the next week. And what was the recommendation for this?
Recommendation from the Finance Committee for both of these roof articles were unanimous, 9-0. Okay. I know that there has been some discussion about these two. Basically what happened was the Finance Committee was looking at different alternatives on how to fund this without having to necessarily go to the ballot box and have to raise taxes. We did realize that under Article 19, which is the 2 elementary school roofs, which is the larger bulk of the $2 million roughly to be used to fix the roofs, that was going to be kind of impossible. We don't want to, as mentioned before, drain our stabilization accounts or drain our free cash and prohibit us from being able to move forward with capital projects next year. But we do hope that maybe at the end of the year for the smaller portion, the high school, middle school roof, which is Article 18, there'll be some leftover funds that could at least help offset. But regardless, the Finance Committee believes that the money should be at least appropriated so that way that the project can move forward, because the need to fix the roofs is dire, and we need to make sure that we're putting our children first in this matter.
Okay. So that's 18 and 19. 20 is, now we're getting into deep water here. Water Department infrastructure improvements, $2.5 million. And this also requires a ballot vote?
No, this does not.
Not this one. The other,
Just a 2/3 majority.
21, 22. Okay, so tell us about Article 20.
So because this is not general fund funded, it would not be subject to a debt exclusion. In Ipswich, there is the Bamford Bylaw, which says if it's 0.1% of assessed value, of equalized value, the project cost, then you do need to go for a ballot vote. That's still not a debt exclusion, because debt exclusion is a specific thing for general funds, tax levy funded things. This is rate funded. This is utility charge funded.
And we have 2 of those on this.
And we do have 2 of those, but I think we're $3.5 billion, so it would be 3.5.
It's about $3 million in change.
It's about $3 million.
Triggers the Banfield.
Yeah, the Banfield Amendment is triggered by about $3.5 million in change on a project cost. So this is short of that. So this is basically some water infrastructure upgrades and specifically improvements to Dow Dam, which will, it'll make that more resilient of a facility, but also I think give us access to additional water draw from it, because the intake is sort of higher at the water level. So if the water level drops, you can't use the intake. But if you drop the intake down, you can have access to more water.
Okay. And recommendation on this one is similar?
Similar, unanimous in support. A little bit background, this actually has been on Vicky's radar years ago. I remember being on the water subcommittee, she was discussing this, and like Stephen had mentioned, the benefit about repairing this valve is that we're able to lower our water levels. So during extreme droughts. I think it's about 10 million gallons worth of water we're able to now access once this gets repaired, which, to put that into perspective, if we're in a serious drought like in 2016, that'll give us an additional 10 days worth of water to the community without seeing major effects. So we are absolutely in support of this, 9-0 unanimous.
Okay. Yes, 21 and 22, these are the two that trigger the ban for bylaws. They're borrowing, that'll require 2/3 votes, but also a majority vote at the polls. So 21 is wastewater department infrastructure improvement.
So this is the town wharf pump station, and if you've seen Vicky's presentation on this, it really is sort of dire how close to it's in the flood plain, and a flood issue at the wharf could really cripple our ability to manage our wastewater there, and that would be that could have potentially serious environmental consequences. So the project is the $7.5 million is a portion of the project to move the pump station upland to really kind of next to town hall on in the sort of the corner of the fields where it would connect to our force main. We are seeking a $15 million grant to fund the remaining part of the project, and if we don't get the grant, we won't end up borrowing this money because we don't have enough to go forward with the project, so we'd have to be on to Plan B. But so voters should know that even if we hope they support it, because something has to happen differently with that pump station. It has to go someplace else, or we have to do something different. But if we don't get the $15 million, I don't think we could pursue it alone locally.
And when would we know that? In a year?
Hopefully soon.
Like
Yeah.
Sometime this calendar year?
Hopefully within fiscal year 25.
Okay.
Sorry, 24.
Right, okay. So, Michael, what did the FinCom say about this one?
FinCom was in unanimous support.
Okay. And 22 is another one that's over the 3.5 and change, so it triggers the ban for bylaws, is to authorize the elect commissioners to borrow $5 million from the federal government.
Yeah, this is a little different in that, when you think of municipal borrowing, even on a utility side, it's a bond. You borrow, you go to the marketplace, people buy your bonds, you use it. Yeah, public safety building, we're about to go to the marketplace to do the permanent financing for the public safety building, which was approved a few years ago for $25 million or so. In this case, it's really applying for what amounts to a line of credit from USDA to the town via ELD. And then as ELD loans this money out to customers, to ratepayers, to make energy efficiency improvements to their homes, say, for example, you switched from an oil
Before we get to that, is there risk in the application, or is it just a matter of forms and it gets?
I think it's just a matter of forms. I think it's sort of a pre-approved thing.
Okay.
So I don't get the sense that it's competitive. I mean, John made the presentation to the Finance Committee. I think it was just if you were eligible for a certain amount. I think he had applied to be in the program and prove that we could manage it. But I don't think there's it's $5 million here, it could end up being $1 million. I think it's $5 million is the program number. But if I want to convert my oil burner furnace to, electric mini splits in my house, I could take the cost of that and then pay it back on my bill, my electricity bill, over time. And this program gives ELD the resources to loan the customer that money so they can then engage a contractor and make the improvements.
Okay.
It's called on-bill. You'll hear on-bill tariff. And so it means that the payback is on your electricity bill.
Gotcha. And what was the recommendation for this one?
Well, I just want to clarify one thing. So one real benefit about this is that there's no interest tied to the loan, which is huge because it doesn't cost the town anything to borrow the money from the feds to be able to lend it out, and it won't cost the resident anything when it comes to paying back the funds borrowed to improve their home and make it more environmentally sound. The Finance Committee was in support of this unanimously, 9-0.
Now, in the 0% interest cost, I think ELD has said our intention is to pass the 0% interest cost to ratepayers. I think they're leaving the door open in case there are administrative costs to the utility that if this program gets significantly subscribed to, and there becomes sort of an administrative burden, that we could charge a small amount of interest to offset those increased costs. But I think, like Michael said, the goal is to really get this money 0% so people can make the improvements and reduce our carbon footprint.
Okay. Article 23 is another citizen petition. I think there was a little confusion on the petitioner's part. First of all, the Government Study Committee Reform Bylaw says that the Select Board at a town meeting will refer topics to the committee. It doesn't require the town meeting to refer topics. And the second is that the way the town meeting does that is, you're familiar with this, I'm sure, it's a standard motion to commit or refer, where the town meeting will have some topic that it's debating, and someone at some point will say, let's refer this to the Government Study Committee, or it could be the Finance Committee, or the Planning Board, or something, which is the normal way that things get there. I think at this point, my understanding is that the petitioner is going to move to take no action under this, and he'll give a short report of what the Government Study Committee has been up to since it was reformed last year. What was the FinCom's position on that?
This hopefully will be an easy one, because the petitioner came to us at the beginning of our warrant hearing during citizens' queries and asked that we take no action because of what you had just mentioned. So support 9-0 to take no action.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's worth clarifying that, you know, topics that are on the warrant, and let's use the prior article, the ELD program. Say, for example, somebody said, well, how does this really work? We don't understand. Is there an impact? And like, what is it? Does this change anything? Now, none of that applies to that article, but someone hypothetically could say, hey, what does this really mean? We should have the Governance Study Committee study it. But the topic was already on the warrant, and so it would get referred. And so if a topic isn't on the warrant, it can't get referred. And that's why I think for in the future, the Select Board and or citizen petitioners should be mindful of, if they want something studied, they really need to make sure it gets into the warrant.
You see these things a lot, you know, and sometimes it'll be, I move that we refer this to a committee of 1, 2, 3 people and have them study it and come back and report at the next meeting. So that's 23. 24 is another citizen petition. This is a new construction moratorium. And this is another one that is not going to be binding because of the way it's written. But there is a way to, well, the article says, due to the extreme doubt, we propose a new construction moratorium. And there is a way to do it, but you have to do it through amending the zoning bylaws. Because building permits are state permits issued under the state building code. And there is a mechanism in Chapter 40A for the towns to amend their bylaws. But, you know, this topic has come up a couple times, so I think what we're going to do this year is have town council, and I've talked to him about this, to give us an opinion on not just why this is non-binding, but also if someone wants to do it in the future, this is how you do it. And then the last one is the noise control bylaw.
Do you want the recommendations for?
Yeah, what is the recommendation?
So the recommendation for the Finance Committee was to oppose this Article 8-1. We appreciated the spirit of the fact that we don't want to see development in our community go out of control, but at the same time, it would be highly irresponsible of us to halt all new growth in town for a year, because we depend on that type of new growth in order to us to make sure that we have the necessary assets and revenues and incomes to make sure that town government stays functioning and improves. We also oppose this article because, as you had mentioned, the way it was written, it's just kind of to halt everything with a blanket. There's no mechanism in the article to say, okay, well, what happens after that year? We've stopped developing for a year. What have we learned from that? And there's no metrics in this article to accomplish any sort of mitigation factors.
That's getting to the merits of it. I mean, did the vote know that it's ineffective anyway?
What do you mean?
I mean, there's no way that this can become effective.
Right.
I mean, yeah, meaning it would not, it wouldn't prevent the building inspector from issuing building permits or the planning board to approve site plans or things like. And I think that's, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was just going to say, yes, we did note that even if this was voted unanimously, nothing would change. But to the point that you just made, where if this comes up in the future and we do it in the appropriate way, I think it's important that people know that blanketing zero construction, zero growth in town for a year would handicap us more than it would help us.
I mean, I think it's important to say that even it wouldn't be binding upon the town.
Right.
But even if it were, and I don't like to get into hypotheticals, there are consequences that aren't really considered, not the least of which is potential consequences to private property rights. And I guess if I can just, as sort of a PSA thing, it costs a certain amount to run the community, to provide services, schools, things like that, to run the railroad, as I like to say. And each year, the cost to run the railroad, even if you're not expanding services, goes up a certain amount, inflationary or cost, and it was big inflationary increases this year. You have 6,600 or so households. That bill to run the railroad gets split amongst those 6,600 households. If you don't add any new households, then that share still gets borne by that same number. And so I would just say to town meeting, as you think about development in your community, it's important to remember that in addition to the levy, we have what's called new growth. And if you don't have new growth, it would lead to still paying 2.5% each year and probably service reductions because you wouldn't have that new growth revenue. So it is a complicated issue, and I agree with Michael. I think certainly being mindful of the impact of development, especially on our natural resources, is something that is our obligation. We have a moral obligation and a professional obligation to do that.
So the last one is another citizen's petition, and this petitioner did the right thing. He contacted someone and he went through the bylaw, and you can see the way he amended it by strike through and bold italics. But what effectively is this about?
So this is an amendment to our noise bylaw, our noise control bylaw, and it basically restricts landscaping and demolition and construction, demolition, or commercial landscaping work. And it says no Sundays and state or federal holidays, so no construction or commercial landscaping. And then they limit the amount of time from the cutoff time, the daily cutoff time, from 7 p.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, and from 7 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturdays. And then, of course, there would be none allowed on Sundays and holidays.
Right. And what was the recommendation for this one?
This was a little bit split. The recommendation was to oppose this article 6-3. The majority of the folks that wanted to oppose this article thought that it was a little bit of an overreach in certain aspects of it, especially more on the private end of things. Folks wanting to take advantage of a nice summer day and the sunlight still stays out until 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, and they're getting home from work or what have you, want to get some stuff done between the hours of 6:30 and 7:30, that would not be allowed under this proposal. So that was the majority of what people opined on, and then the minority report, which there will be one, thought that this was okay.
So to the do-it-yourselfers of the world, I did talk about the commercial being restricted to 5 p.m. and not Sundays and holidays. Just for the homeowner who does it themselves, the restriction does end. You could do it right now under the current bylaw until 9 p.m. This would change that to 7 p.m. as well. So
Right.
There is an impact to individual homeowners who, like I said, who like to do leaves themselves.
Right.
I'm not one of them, but I do them, but I don't like it.
Okay, so those are the 25 articles, and then there are 5 ballot questions that'll be a week later at the adjourned session, which is technically still part of the annual town meeting. And the first four are the ones that we spoke to earlier, the track Article 18 and 19 under 2.5, 21 and 22 under the Bangford bylaw. And then Article 5 is a non-binding vote proposal, question actually, from the school committee on a new school. We won't be debating these because they're not subject to the debate for town meeting.
Yeah, they're not a part of the warrant. They're just included in the warrant as a.
They're part of the warrant for the adjourned session, but they're not for the debate in the preliminary session.
Right.
So thank you both for helping me go through this, and we hope that folks at home have a little clearer picture of what to expect. And we hope to see you on Tuesday, May 9th at 7 o'clock at the Ipswich High School, and the week following at the election. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.